Hey guys, I read David Ogilvy autobiography. Um, Really good book. Oh, I think I put that backwards. Here you go. Good book. It's about David Ogilvy, who became a marketing giant. He starts off with his early childhood. So he's born in 1911 in Surrey, right outside of London, about 30 minutes south. And he talks about his family having a lot of money at first, and then going through a lot of hardships. Mostly, the depression hit, and then his parents lost pretty much everything they had. They had to fire a lot of their house workers. He went through a really hard time, and his parents struggled to get him into boarding school. And so he goes off to these different boarding schools, and he talks about um, how this one in particular called Fets, how bad he was treated because he was poor, how everyone else was always treated a little bit better than him in class. He wasn't always the best student, and that's probably why. But his teachers let him know that he was there on an exception, that he was poor. Often he didn't have enough money to buy himself like a cake for his birthday. And so he goes through these different boarding schools all through high school, or from his childhood all the way through high school, just because his dad did what he could to get him in through favors. And then he goes to Oxford. And in Oxford, he chose to go to Oxford because his father went to Cambridge, and his grandfather went to Cambridge, and his brothers went to Cambridge, and he didn't want to be compared because he wasn't athletic, and they all were. He couldn't play rugby because he had asthma, and so he's going through life, just trying to kind of find his place, not be the black sheep of the family. But unfortunately, school just wasn't for him, and he decides that he's going to go off and just go on an adventure. So after Oxford, he runs off to this place called the Hotel Majestic, and he he starts off as an assistant to the chefs, and he's cooking for dogs. At one point, he's just cracking eggs for the pastry chef or doing whatever, cleaning up the kitchen, working 14 hours a day. And he said that's where he found his discipline that was missing in his life. He learns a lot about cooking. He's extremely poor, though. He lives on something like 130 francs a month. And he basically says that, sorry, adjust my camera here. He says that he didn't like it, but he was learning a lot, and so he'd stick it out. And he contemplated at one point becoming a chef. He said it would take 15 years of hard work and labor, just working in that kitchen. And his Chef Patrid, I believe, was a student of Escoffier's, and that's pretty big deal at the Savoy in London. So the people he was working with were very well renowned and would serve, mayors and dukes and different people in Parliament. And so he was asked to do the most ridiculous things, like remove bones from animals without leaving any marks. And so he eventually did, and he was promoted and made his way up. And at one point, even got other people fired because of their mistakes, because he said that's just who he was. And so he talks a lot about how he liked working in the kitchen, in the culinary side, but ultimately it just wasn't for him. And so after he went to go sell ovens for this company, and since he had a background in the kitchen, it was easy for him to relate to all the cooks, and he made all these trips around to sell these ovens, these AGA ovens. And what happens is he's so good at selling these ovens that the company asks him to write the manual to sell these ovens, and so he gets really really good at it. He gets he's making not the most money apparently, though. It's not a commission based job, so he's just selling these ovens, and just kind of trying to find his niche in the world again, talking about that. And he just decides it's not for him. So after he decides to go to New York, where he meets a lot of different characters and people in different industries, and he's trying to break into the movie industry. And he ends up meeting a Dr. Libman. And Dr. Libman is a pretty unique character because the way he describes him. Dr. Libman at one point even makes a phone call to the White House to ask who the vice president is, because the president is going to die in 6 months. He met the president 3 or 4 weeks prior, And this doctor was known for meeting people and just knowing that they were sick. It's a pretty crazy story. You can look him up on the internet. It's pretty nuts. Dr. Libman. And so Dr. Libman introduces David to a bunch of different people and connects him, and he goes up to Hollywood. And he ends up working for Dr. Gallup. And if you've ever heard of a Gallup poll, that's who started it. And they use these Gallup polls not for political purposes, but actually for being able to decipher if a movie will be successful, if it will be great to use a certain actor, if it's a good idea to use a certain plot. They knew what themes would sell and what wouldn't. So essentially, Ogilvy was able to assist in creating movies early on in the movie culture by telling big studios what would sell, what wouldn't sell, what was a good idea. And so he did that for a while. But he complained about his salary being pretty low, even though he was a great success. He would talk about hanging out with movie stars and people who had homes larger than he's ever been in. But he was only making $40 a week as a salary. So then World War II came, and he decided that he was going to go, I don't know exactly, it kind of skips around a lot, but his exact connection, he ended up getting into the Secret Service for Britain, which isn't the same thing as the Secret Service of the United States, but he goes there and he's working with the likes of Winston Churchill, his top generals on the intelligence side, but he is a full trained soldier. He actually works in South America, and he gets a lot of details on what countries are helping are working against the Allied forces, and it's a pretty interesting story. And he talks about meeting the intelligence officers who discovered the attack on Pearl Harbor and letting the United States know beforehand, but nothing was done. So I thought that was pretty interesting, how just the crazy life he lives. He's kind of like a Forrest Gump. He's going from, I was a chef, I was a salesman, I was this, and the people he talks about meeting is just incredible. All the top actors of the heyday, and it's pretty interesting. So after that, after the war is over, he no longer has a part in the Secret Service, and he decides that he's going to go and head back to America. And he lives on Amish farms, and he farms tobacco, and he gets to know these people, and he talks a lot about his just reflection on himself. What's really interesting through this whole thing, and in the preface of the book, he actually says, "I'm 85, and the only reason I'm writing this book is because my publisher asks." And I think that's interesting because he's basically telling you, I don't really want to write this book. I'm doing it because somebody asked me to. And he has the most interesting story you could ever read. It's a pretty crazy, the extremes he goes to. And towards the end, he starts his own marketing firm. And that's kind of where he found his niche in the world, was Ogilvy and Mathers, which actually ended up being bought out when he went public and selling the stock. And he retires in France after that, but he's extremely successful with his marketing and advertising firm, which is what he ultimately does. And he still talks about when he's retired how he likes to garden and to look back at the firms and go visit them, and from time to time he'll even cook. And so it's like he kept all of his skills in life, and it's pretty crazy to think he had a big impact on World War II. He had a big impact on the movie industry early on in the 30s and the 40s, and just overall a crazy story that he has. I really enjoyed reading the book. I thought it was a pretty interesting take on life. He talks a lot. He's very vulgar at times, the way he describes things. He's very straightforward and blunt. At one point, when he's in the very beginning, when he's describing his mother, he describes her as pretty much being voluptuous, like having a small waist, and it's just kind of catches you off guard because it's a whole different era that he grew up in, and he was very old school and traditional, and kind of a unique character. And so definitely recommend the book. If you get a chance, just read it. It'll be worth your time. Thanks.